Come in, welcome. Please come in and make your way around the outside of any of these tables and remain standing. Come in, welcome. Come in, come in. Please make your way around the outside of any of these tables and remain standing. If you have difficulty standing, you're welcome to sit down. That's okay. But if you are good at standing, please do so. Come in, welcome. We have great tables up here and over here and plenty of seating over here too. So please come in more towards the front. You're not on the spot, by the way. Don't worry about sitting up front. But come in and make your way around the outside of the tables and remain standing if you would, please. Welcome. Good to see you. Come on in, you guys. All the way over. Come over here. Come over here. Got some seats over there. Come in, come in. Welcome. Please come in, make your way around the outside of any of these tables and remain standing, please. Oh, by the way, if you're doubting anything, these are really great seats right here. I'm not lying to you. And you can also sit over here too. You know I'm not lying. Yeah. Come in, everyone, please. Make your way around the outside of any of these tables and remain standing, please. Very good. We need somebody to sit here. Would anybody like somebody just sit in one of these two seats? Anybody? Just move around, bring your family, be brave, but right there would be good. And let's see. Boy, you got a whole bunch of people here. You guys are over there. That's perfect. Are you sitting here? You're sitting there. Okay, if you stop sitting there and start sitting there, that'll be good later on. Okay, and very good. These are great seats right here. You're good. Okay, fantastic. Welcome to the Biblical Dinner. My name is McCarl. I'm from Northern California, from a little town called Cool. It's not named after the weather. It's named after the man who was an evangelist in the gold rush of California, going around and evangelizing the prospectors, and they named the town after him, and I happen to live there. It's up in the Sierra foothills, sort of west of no place and east of, well, I don't even know where. But that's where I'm from. And everything you're going to hear tonight, I learned, well, not just from books, but from Israel. I run tours there. I take people there every year. I teach there. I do a lot there. And the more I go, the more I get excited because the more I learn. As your pastor knows, he's been there 4 times, right, Ray? Yeah. So you pick these things up, and it brings the Bible together. Now, tonight, what I want to do is take you back 2,000 years to an ancient feast. The feast that you'll be attending is, well, I'm putting it on. And when you attend this feast, and as you attend it, you're going to start seeing things pop out of Scripture because you're going to do things, see things, understand things that you've been looking at all along. And maybe you've never noticed that's in the Bible. I've done this same dinner with Arabs at an Arab church in the city of Nazareth in Israel, and they practiced the same things you're going to be doing tonight, and they never connected them with the Bible. And when I showed them what it was, and I was a little nervous about it, they went wild. So hopefully you will too. At least as one woman said very, very casually, she said, after a biblical dinner, the Bible became a pop-up book. And hopefully that'll be the case for you. So I'm going to get you inside their heads, in their minds, looking through their eyes at the way things were a couple of thousand years ago in ancient Judea at the time of Jesus. Now, to get you to a feast, well, I have to invite you. And 2,000 years ago, here I am, this rich man. You can tell by the way I'm dressed. I'm a wealthy man. But I've been listening to this young rabbi, you see. And he's been saying some astonishing things. And one of the things he told me was that you rich people, don't just invite your rich friends to the feast who can pay you back with another feast. Instead, invite the poor to your feasts who cannot pay you back, and you will have great honor in heaven. And I thought, that's a marvelous idea. I happen to know some very poor people. I will invite them. You. And so I send my chief servant to your house. I've done it before because I let you know there's a feast coming and you're coming to the feast and you've never been to one before, not like this. You may have done some ceremonious feasts as being a good Hebrew Jew of that time. But this is a special feast at my house. And this is something that you've never partaken of before. And you'll see why in a little while. And so finally, after having it announced, maybe weeks, months ago, you don't have a clock, you don't have a conventional calendar like we do today. Suddenly there's a pounding on the door and a man shouting, I have a gospel for you, I have a gospel for you. What's that all about? He's going to preach the gospel? No, the word gospel was around a long time before the Christian message of salvation was ever attached to it. It simply meant that I have a message for you that is all good news and contains no bad news. No wonder the Christian message was attached to that word so easily, because it was all good news. You can imagine in those days the way everything was back then, that when somebody comes pounding on your door, you know it's bad news. No, he's pounding, I have a gospel, and you come rushing to the door, and my chief servant says, it's time to go to the feast, and you follow him. And as my chief servant leads you through the streets of the village to my house, my wealthy house, he starts shouting your name. Sir, what is your name? John. Good biblical name. John is coming to my master's feast. He's to be the guest of honor. John is coming to my master's feast. He's to be the guest of honor. And he's making a big fuss about you, and you're not embarrassed. You're not going, I wish he'd stop. You're going, no, that's me. I get the guest of honor. This is very important and such a high honor to be at a feast. And the servant, part of honoring you, because honor and shame motivated these people, and you're being honored and you're soaking it up, and everybody's looking at you from their doorways or on the street as you're walking through the street. Towards the end of the day, usually getting on towards sunset is when these would start, and they're looking at you saying, I wish I was John. Oh, I wish I was John. So he comes up to my house, and the chief servant's shouting, John is coming, guest of honor. And suddenly the servant steps out of the way, and I send all my other servants out to meet John, even before he comes into my doorway. They come out with pots of water and towels, and they pour water on his hands, and some get down and pour water on his feet, and they hand him a towel. He splashes water on his face, and he wipes it all off and wipes down his hands, and he's refreshed just from even the short journey coming to my house. And then finally, when he's done wiping his hands and the servants take the towels from him and his feet are nice and cool and refreshed, they're not washed, they're just refreshed, then I approach John from my doorway, because you are to be my honored guest, and I greet you in the typical manner of that day. I say to you, hi, how's it going? No, of course not. Have you ever thought about our greetings here in America? Hello. What's that mean? I don't know. Hi. What's that mean? I don't know. How's it going? I don't want to ask and know, and you don't want to answer, but it's considered polite, isn't it? And it's part of our greeting. But over there, and even to this day, they still partially do it. They would say something else, and some of you know what it is. I would come up to John and I would say, peace be unto you. That's how I would greet you. And he would greet me, and unto you peace. Now, that is not a hi, how are you? It's a blessing. You see, you guys know what a blessing is, don't you? What you do over your food? No. A blessing is something that you are asking God to provide that you really can't. It goes way above and beyond anything you could ever do. A blessing to say God bless you means I can't do it, but he can, and I want him to. And so it's a prayer. I don't mean it in any superstitious sense when I say a wishful prayer. You understand, I'm not getting carnal on you here with that. But it's, I want God to do this for you. And so I say, peace be unto you. And the type of peace, it's not like we're going to have, let's have a pleasant evening. Let's have a nice, quiet, peaceful evening, a retreat from the messy world. It's nothing like that. This is the peace that I would ask that God would put upon you, or upon any of you if I greeted you this way. That would be the peace of a long life, a healthy life, lots of food, healthy children, all of these things. It's not the peace of some prosperity doctrine. Please don't misunderstand that either. This is something that any of us would want, really. We wish we did have. Not all of us do have, but I'm asking God to bless you with it when I greet you. And it sounds like this. Repeat after me. Shalom Aleichem.
Shalom Aleichem.
Ah, very good New York accent. Shalom Aleichem. You got to get that in there. It's very good diction. It's not the way we talk, but Shalom Aleichem. Very good. Again, Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem. And if I come up to you and say, Shalom Aleichem, your response back to me and unto you peace sounds like this. Aleichem ha-shalom. So it's basically backwards. I say to you, Shalom Aleichem, you respond, Aleichem ha-shalom. So I say to you, Shalom Aleichem, and you respond, Shalom Aleichem. Oh, that's how you greet one another, and it's a blessing, so it's how you bless one another. Would you please turn to your neighbor and greet one another in the proper way? Shalom Aleichem, Aleichem ha-shalom. Everybody greet one another, please. Very good. We are going to have a very blessed evening tonight because God loves to bless. And if he intends to, he will, because you just asked him to do it. But there's something else about this. First of all, and we're not done yet. You're not going to sit down just yet because we have to do all of this standing. But you may be asking, well, wait a minute now. Okay, that's really great. Is this in the Bible? Indeed it is. In fact, this is perfect timing tonight to talk about it because it happened on Resurrection Day way back when Jesus first came out of the tomb. But it didn't happen first thing in the morning. This is what we generally talk about on Resurrection Day, as you'll obviously hear from Pastor Ray and anybody talking about the subject. But instead, it happened the night of Resurrection Day. You see, Jesus came out of that tomb alive and risen. He encountered the women in the morning, and we have lots of record on that in the Bible. He encountered Peter in the afternoon. We don't know what went on there. All we know is that it happened. We know nothing more about it. And it didn't exactly make Peter very happy, even though Jesus, I'm sure, wasn't being mean or anything. But that night, the disciples had locked themselves into a room in Jerusalem, and they're terrified. Because when the tomb was found open, the Roman seals that were sealing the tomb shut were broken, and the guards were paid by the religious leaders to tell the people and their superiors that the disciples broke the seals and stole the body. That's a crucifixion offense. So now the disciples are on every post office in Jerusalem. People are looking for them, so they have a death sentence on them, and they're terrified. They're now holed up in this little room. Judas is gone. Thomas is missing. And here are the rest of the guys. But it doesn't keep the risen Lord Jesus out, does it? You know the story. He shows up miraculously. There he is in the room. He's not a ghost. And he says to the disciples, Shalom Aleichem. And they said? They said nothing. They were terrified. They did think he was a ghost. And then he asked them for food and he ate with them. A week later, they're still holed up in that room. They're still scared. They don't want to leave because they're marked men. Jesus shows up, Shalom Aleichem. They still didn't answer him. They're still concerned, even though it's the risen Lord Jesus. But that's one of the places you find this in the Bible. But there's a second thing that would happen at this time, and actually the greetings could go on and on. We could take half the evening and do greetings. It would be interesting. And they did it very quickly, but when we learn them, it takes longer, doesn't it? There would be a gesture involved. So I would come up to John and I would say Shalom Aleichem, and I would give a gesture, and it looks like this. Everybody raise your right hand. Start with your right hand almost all the time. You take your right hand and you touch your heart, you touch your lips, you touch your forehead, palms open and bow, like that. Again, heart, lips, forehead, palms open and bow. And I would do this to John, and he would do it to me. And what it means is this, because they did a lot of things that contained unspoken messages that were powerful, and you'll learn some of these tonight. And this is just one of them. It meant this, that when I come up to John and I touch my heart, I'm saying with my heart, honestly, with my heart, I love you. When I touch my lips, I'm telling him non-verbally, with my lips, I will honor you and praise you as a great man. With my thoughts, this is truly the most important one, touching my forehead. With my thoughts, I esteem you as a far greater man than I will ever be. I am your servant. You are my king. I esteem you highly. By the way, we would say, I worship you. It's not like a religious thing, but I would hold you in the esteem almost of worship. They didn't know anything about self-esteem in those days. What they did understand was others' esteem. Esteeming others is better than yourself. Even though Jesus would teach that, others taught it too. So with my heart, I love you. With my lips, I honor you. With my mind, with my thoughts, I worship you, or I esteem you as far greater than me, and I will treat you like that for the rest of the night. With my palms open, there's nothing there to harm you. With my bow, I humble myself before you. Oh, by the way, the whole time while saying, Shalom Aleichem, Aleichem HaShalom, and you will do it with the gesture, with the greeting. You say, is this a coordination test? Yes! But they did it very naturally in those days. Would you please turn to your neighbor with the gesture and once again bless one another. Shalom Aleichem, Aleichem HaShalom. Now, you do realize that on Resurrection Sunday, this coming Sunday, you will show up at church, and those of you who were here are going to walk up to one another and do the gesture, and everybody else is going to look at you like, what in the world just happened? So, but practice it as you would. But that is still something that in the deeper parts of the Middle East that have not modernized, people still do to this day. So it's still there. Well, there would be other parts of the greeting, including a holy kiss. No, I'm not going to make you do that tonight. But a holy kiss, when you would give one peck on each cheek 3 times in those days, indicated you were family. And Peter twice and Paul twice told people in their letters that they wrote to, greet one another with a holy kiss. And he's talking to a church, which tells you how the church was to treat each other in the church, not as individuals who attended the church, but as family when you ever encountered them and you greeted each other with a holy kiss, and the whole watching world said, this is a family. That's the church, folks. And so now that we have greeted each other properly and very formally, I would now escort John or you into my house. As you step into my courtyard and over the threshold, you would kick your shoes off. I'm not going to ask you to take your shoes off tonight, but in those days, you never wore your shoes into anyone's house, even if they had a dirt floor. You would always take your sandals off and leave them by the threshold, and then you step into my house, and you would see this marvelous feast and this beautiful table set. You've never eaten at a table like this before, seen a setup quite like this, and I would bring you in and tell you to, please sit down. Everyone have a seat. All right. Shh. You're doing well. I hear lots of rejoicing. This is marvelous. Now listen, when you come into my house and you sit down, all this food is in front of you, but you are forbidden to touch it until I bestow upon you 4 gifts of hospitality. And actually, there were more than that. The first gift that I would give, that I'm not even mentioning tonight, is a formal hand washing where I would take up to 15 minutes to personally scrub both of your hands and make them ceremonially clean to eat my meal. So that's a big deal. But then we're skipping that part tonight. We're going to go ahead and go over to the first gift of hospitality that would make a big difference with you. You see, you're seated at my table and you've been refreshed, and there's all kinds of food in front of you, but you're waiting for me to do something to you, which is something you probably have not had done, at least in this environment. I'm going to find somebody, one of my servants. If I'm a Hebrew, if I'm a Jew, I will have servants. If I'm a Greek or a Roman, I will have slaves. There's a big difference between the two, but their functions were about the same. And I'm going to have this one servant, this one slave, if I'm a Greek, come over and wash your feet. Now, you say, well, I've already had water poured on my feet when I was coming in. You did. That's not a foot washing. But I'm going to bring over this guy to wash your feet. Now, there's some things you're going to need to remember here, because we're going to come back to this later on in the evening. That first of all, the feet, your feet, are considered the filthiest part of the human body in that part of the world. If you're from another country, especially in Asia or South Asia or even parts of Africa, you know that that's still the case today. The filthiest part of the human body in about 1/3 to 1/2 of the world's mind today, as it was back then, is the bottom of your feet, because we know where your feet have been. First of all, you're wearing open-toed sandals. It's an agrarian society, so you're out there in farmlands. What do you put on your crops? Fertilizer. What have you been walking in? Ew. We know where your feet have been. Oh, and also, since you've been around where the animals are, if you live in a village or a city, they didn't have, well, shall we say, infrastructure like we have today, sewers. So a lot of things went out on the street that are unmentionable. And you've been walking through that too. You say, well, those places would smell bad. Yes, they did. Constantly, continually. That was just life in those days. It's something we don't relate to well, but they did. And we know where your feet have been. So your feet are the filthiest part of the human body. So the servant that I bring in to wash your feet is not my chief servant, is not one of my teachers perhaps, or one of my farmers. It's a person who, as some of you know, a fellow named Gail Irwin, who's a very dear friend of mine, says is the lowest, the least, the last of all my servants. And in fact, in their minds in those days, this person was the lowest form of human life. They had the worst job in the world, and as far as their position in life goes, there was nobody who was worse off than the foot washer. And that's the person who comes in with the pitcher, the basin, and the towel and begins to wash your feet. And you like it, because he doesn't just pour water on your feet. With his bare hands, he scrubs the bottom of your feet and all the filth from it, which means that he's handling this nasty stuff and your feet. And there's even more to it than that. You see, if you have been following the events of the Middle East lately, and you're watching online, or maybe you get one of those things that we used to call, newspapers, right? Or magazines. And in there, occasionally, or online, you'll see a picture of a Western diplomat. And he's meeting with, let's say, a Saudi Arabian prince, somebody who's very important, and they're Arabs, so they're dressed in their traditional garments. And they're sitting in big, puffy chairs, almost like a recliner. And as they sit sort of next to each other and people are taking pictures of them, if you notice these pictures, they always look very uncomfortable. But you can't figure out why. It's just like, why do they look so uncomfortable? And the reason is this. If you look at the Western diplomat, his feet are flat on the ground. His legs aren't crossed. His ankles aren't even crossed. His feet are flat on the floor. Because even accidentally exposing the bottom of your foot to another person is a deadly insult. It's like saying, I hate you and I'd kill you if I could. That's what it meant to them. So you never expose the bottom of your foot to another person. So they're very, very modest, and they put their feet flat on the ground. Some of you are old enough to remember that when President George W. Bush was about to leave office, he did a news conference in Iraq. It was a surprise conference. And as he's standing up in front of these reporters at a podium, suddenly a horrific thing happened. A shoe came flying past his head, somebody's penny loafer. And he ducks and he smiles. And then another shoe goes flying past his head, another penny loafer. And then a ruckus breaks out in the back of the room, and all of these security guards pile on top of this one man who was an Iraqi, who had taken his shoes off and hurled them at the president. It's the worst insult you could ever give to any human being in that world, because it was related to your feet. If you see pictures of people protesting, Middle Eastern kings and whoever, important people, they'll often put shoes on top of their statue or try and shove it into a bronze statue of their mouth, because it's the worst insult they could ever give. John 13, Jesus mentions his betrayer before he actually points him out, Judas Iscariot. And he said, the one who has eaten my bread has lifted up my heel against me, lifted up his heel against me. You see what's going on? You turn your back to a person, you show them the bottom of your foot. It means they hate you. They hate you viscerally. So the foot washing servant has to handle that part of your body. Lowest form of human life. So that's the first gift of hospitality. Jim, I'm going to ask you to turn the sound down just a little bit. The music went up. It kind of does that on its own, so I'm just going to have him bring it down just a hair. Now, the second gift of hospitality is right there on your table. It's a cup of cold water. In those days, I would give you the most precious commodity in the Middle East for you to consume. I'd hand you a cup of water, and you would be so glad. Cold water, where do you get that? Out of your ancient refrigerator. All you would need to get cold water, especially when it's warm or hot outside, is you would take a pitcher that would be made out of greenware, perhaps, just low-fired clay like terracotta. You soak the whole jug in water, and then you put water in the jug. You take it outside, set it in the shade, but on a very hot day, and the water sweats through the outside of the jug, and the temperature on the inside plunges. And on a 110-degree desert day, I can pour you a cup of water that's about 70 to 73 degrees. So I can give you a cup of cold water. And Jesus, of course, talked about hospitality. Whoever gives a cup of cold water in my name or for my sake, their great is their reward in heaven. It's saying I'm welcoming Jesus when you give a cup of cold water to one of his disciples. Wow, it's right there. Oh, there's more. You see, this is, of course, the gift of hospitality that John has been waiting for as my guest of honor. His feet are washed. He's refreshed. He's got that cup of cold water. But then he sees me pick up this flask, and he knows exactly what this is about. The flask would have olive oil in it, not perfume. Perfume's very expensive, but it would be scented olive oil, scented like some Middle Eastern spice, maybe some flower like a rose or something like that, but it smells really good. And there's a lot of olive oil in there. And the people were into this, but especially at a moment like this, because only the guest of honor got this. And I would come up to John, and John knows what's going to happen. He's thrilled. And I come up behind him, and the anticipation is growing. And I snap the seal off the top, and I take all the olive oil and pour it all over his head. Don't worry, there's nothing in there. It's okay. And as I pour it all over his head, all this oil goes dripping down his head, his forehead, his face, his neck, down into his shoulders. I mean, all over his clothes. His wife is going, and how am I going to get those spots out? Thank you very much. But it's all over him. But you see, that's not the end of it. I come up behind him, and then I massage it into his scalp, into his face, into his neck. Have you guys ever had a scalp massage? This is the gift of hospitality where you just say, just keep right on going, do not stop. And because he's my guest of honor and I am his servant that night, I'm going to keep going until he tells me to stop. All of you, rest of you folks at the table, you got to wait. And you wish you were him. Because even though he's slick with this oil and he's all wet with it, what an honor it is. And I've done something else. And I mean this not in a funny sense. I mean this in a very serious sense. I have beautified him. What do I mean by that? It talks about being anointed with oil, or the oil of joy in the Bible. It's anointing someone with scented oil because, well, frankly, my house smells really bad. You see, my fourth gift of hospitality is I'm going to burn a pinch of incense somewhere in the house because it takes an edge off the smell. Everybody's house smelled bad. But in this case, when putting this oil on him, not even perfume, suddenly there's this beautiful aroma going through the house. And it originates with him. He's the source of this beautiful smell that's filling the whole room. And that was considered an amazing honor. He is honoring all the rest of you by smelling so good. And besides, when you got here, you didn't smell so good. Last time you bathed might have been a month or two ago. So that's just the way it was in those days. And when he leaves, slicked down with oil, shiny with oil, and spots all over his clothes, and he walks home, people are going to look at him and they're not going to say, ew, ugh. They're going to look at him and say, somebody really loves that man. So that's a great honor. And those are your gifts of hospitality. And there would even be more. And they just keep coming and coming because I'm required by ancient honor to welcome you in the most superior ways that I possibly can. Hospitality, if you decide you want to study it in the Bible, it's on virtually every page of the Bible in one form or another. It's that important to them. So I am going to do lots of stuff. But we'll shorten it because you got to be getting a little hungry right now. And so first of all, we're going to start eating, but you have to observe, well, at least one of many table manners back in those days. And here's the most important one. Once again, would you please raise your right hand? Just everybody put it up. Look at your table with your right hand raised. You notice that there's no silverware. Everybody wiggle your fingers. That's your silverware. Your right hand is your knife, your fork, and your spoon. You will eat with your right hand. Everybody raise your left hand. You will not touch my food with this horrible hand. Everybody raise your right hand. This is the clean hand. This is the kosher hand. Everyone raise your left hand. You will not touch my food with this hand because in the days of no toilet paper, that's all I'm going to say. You get the idea. Now, please understand, I have already washed your hands in this very long ceremonious hand washing. Your hands are physically clean, but the use of the left hand was considered incredibly unclean, and you never, ever touched food with it. I got to tell you a quick story before I complete this one. Back over in the book of Luke, you have an incident that occurs where a man is brought into the synagogue at Capernaum by the Pharisees and the scribes trying to get Jesus to heal on the Sabbath, which he would clearly do, but they thought it was a sin. As he comes into the synagogue, here comes this poor man that has a withered hand. Now that means his hand is not functional, it's paralyzed, the muscles and whatever have withered away, he's just in really bad shape. Luke tells us it was his right hand. Jesus sees the man and has compassion on him, and he tells the man, stretch out your hand. The man stretches out his right hand, and he's completely healed. But you need to remember, because of what I just told you, understand how their society worked. He didn't just restore the man to health. He restored him to his friends and his family, because if he touched food with his left hand, he defiled it, and nobody would allow him to ever eat with them up until that moment when Jesus healed him. Suddenly he's back home. That's how important that miracle was, because it was his right hand. Now he's completely restored socially to the way the world was in those days. So your right hand is the hand you're going to eat with tonight. Now, you say, I'm left-handed. Congratulations. Tonight you get to find out what it's like to eat right-handed. You may say, but I don't want to. Fine, you don't have to. Have your neighbor feed you, but you're not touching my food with your right hand. Okay, I'm just kidding on that one, but please do try it. By the way, you may say, well, look, how do I peel an egg? Are you going to eat the shell? Then hold the shell in your left hand, peel it with your right hand, and eat the contents. I want to pass a bowl. Do I have to do it with my right hand? No, you're not going to eat the bowl. You can pick up the bowl or the basket with your left hand. It's the food coming in contact with the food. And in those days, with your left hand, if you even accidentally brush the food, to honor you, I would discreetly have the food removed because you defiled it for the sake of the other guests, and I would not bring you any shame by doing that. But you don't touch food with your left hand in those days. And this is your knife, your fork, and your spoon. By the way, our eating utensils weren't even invented until 1,000 years ago. So we missed it by 2,000 years back at this time. So that's how you're going to eat. Now, to begin the meal, and servants, these guys are going to serve you something in just a few minutes you're really going to enjoy. It's a lamb stew. But you can go ahead and get up and begin to prepare it now. And I would like to show you something. To begin the meal, you always started with the most important item of food on the table, and it's always bread. If you go to Southeast Asia, it's rice. You go to other parts of the world, it might be something else. But in the Middle East, it was always bread, and especially among the Jews. A Jewish scholar once made a great statement. Those of you that are, again, students of the Bible or you like theology, this Jewish scholar said, to the Jew, bread is life. It's the very essence of our being. Now, that's kind of a strange statement, but they are invested in this piece of food. Why? Well, first of all, they remember any bread is a miracle. It's not just that like manna came from heaven, which it did. It was a miracle of God during the time of Moses, where God gave them the bread from heaven, the manna from heaven, 6 days out of 7, and it kept overnight for the Sabbath day. But that was a miracle from heaven, and this commemorated it. Bread helped them remember God provides the bread. But to provide miraculously something that grows out of the ground, that bears a seed, that you can pick the seed and you can roast it, grind it up, and then turn it into one of these, folks, that's a big miracle too. So they looked at bread not only as their staple, but as the provision from God, miraculous on all levels. They respected it. They reverenced it. They reverenced it so much that Jesus even used bread to describe himself. He had just finished feeding the 5,000 the day before. The next morning, after he walked on water and ended up back at Capernaum, all the people showed up in Capernaum and they wanted breakfast. And Jesus said, "You want more bread? Okay, I'll give you more bread. I am the bread of life." You see, yesterday was the illustration. Today is the reality. I am the bread of life. Your fathers, ancestors, they ate manna in the wilderness, but they died. This is the bread that comes down from heaven, that one may eat of it and not die. I'm the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever. And the bread that I shall give, Jesus said, is my flesh, which I shall give for the life of the world. You want to live forever? You need to eat me. I'm the bread of life. I'm like that bread. That's how they esteem bread so much. And Jesus planted himself right in the middle of the thing that they esteem the most. Are you seeing it? Are you getting it? Now here's the deal. What am I doing wrong? I'm holding the most holy thing on that table with my left hand. Oh, that's terrible. No, you can do that. Well, you just told us you can't do that. I did. You can't do that with any other type of food, but you can do it with this. Because there are certain priorities in place here. You say, that's silly. Yeah, it really is, but it's also very practical. You see, the Jews always began a meal with prayer, like we do, but they didn't do it the same way we do it. And you can see indications of this in the Bible, even though that prayer has never been recorded for us. It would be like saying in a novel, everybody saying happy birthday to so-and-so. Well, you wouldn't have to put the lyrics down because we all know the lyrics. They could say they prayed. They broke bread to pray. And you don't have to say what the prayer was because everybody knew the prayer. And boy, I could launch off in a sermon on that one right now because there's a lot to say about that. But meanwhile, they always started the meal with bread, but they had to break it in order to show their gratitude to God. It was also considered wickedness to cut bread with a knife. Now, don't go home and start breaking bread and stop cutting it. That's their tradition. It's not ours, and that was a long time ago. But it was wicked to cut it with a knife. It was showing ingratitude towards God, even blasphemy. So the way that you showed your gratitude to God is you would pray, and then you would tear the bread in half. You break the bread, and you needed both hands to do it. You say, that's silly. Yeah, but it's practical, and they had to do it. And so they had their exceptions, and this was one of them. And so they would begin the meal with a prayer. It involved the bread. When they prayed, when the Jews prayed over any given meal, including the Lord Jesus Christ, they always prayed the same prayer every single time. You say, that's not very Christian. It's Jewish. It's not Christian. It's what they do and what they did, and Jesus would have done it too. It's a very quick prayer, a short prayer, and a very real prayer. And when Jesus prayed, whether it was a rote prayer or not, he meant every word of it, as you know, because he knew who he was talking to. His Father, and don't forget, your Father. Don't forget, same Father. Well, here's how they prayed. One more thing. Did they ever pray spontaneously? I mean, tonight, if we were to treat it like this is just a regular church potluck or something, somebody would say, who wants to pray? Somebody would volunteer, and they would pray as the Lord led them, whatever was on their heart, you would say. And then everybody would agree and say amen, and then you'd begin to eat. They did pray spontaneously, but they did it when it counted the most. When they were full and happy, satisfied at the end of the meal. And they would have one person designated to pray at the end of the meal, and they could pray for as long as they wanted to about anything they wanted to pray about. And we do indeed have one of those prayers in the Bible written down for us. If you haven't guessed already, it's all of John chapter 17. Jesus' what we call his great high priestly prayer. It was not prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. After he prayed it, they went out to the garden. So they weren't in the garden. They were still in the room. And when Jesus prayed that prayer, well, you need to go read it because you're in it. He prayed for you. You're in it, starting in verse 20, and you can go read it yourself. But that was the spontaneous prayer at the end of the meal. But at the beginning of the meal, here's how the prayer went. First of all, with reverence, with respect, I would like all of you to please take a piece of bread and hold it in both hands, gently. If you're handing it to your neighbor, hand it to them as if you're handing to them life itself. This is how they would have treated bread in those days. Now, here's how they would have prayed. First of all, everybody hold the bread. Have you got it? Take the bread and hold it up towards heaven. And with your eyes open, you say, well, that's not very Christian. It's Jewish. This is what they did. So they would look up towards heaven rather than bowing their heads. They present the bread that God gave them back to the Lord. And then they would pray this prayer. And if you would please repeat after me, this is what they would say. Blessed art thou, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who gives us bread from the earth. That's the prayer that Jesus would have prayed thousands of times over any given meal. And that's your prayer. And you did it just like him, except for one thing. You did it in the wrong language. Let's pray the prayer that Jesus would have prayed in the language in which he would have prayed it. Repeat after me. You ready? Hold the bread up towards heaven, eyes looking up towards heaven, and together we say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, Melech ha'olam, hametzei lechem, min haaretz. That's your prayer. Here's your amen. Everybody tear off a small bite-sized piece. Do not eat it. Have you got it? Hold the bite-sized piece of bread in your hand. Reach around to your left and put it in the mouth of the person to your left, just like that. Everybody do that right now. I love this part. I have done biblical dinners, and I've had the privilege of doing it on 6 different continents with all kinds of different people and all kinds of different cultures. And whenever they go putting bread in each other's mouth, they all laugh, as well you should. But when I've done it in the Middle East, they don't laugh. It's more of a sense of awe, because what this means when you take a piece of bread and you tear it off is your amen, and you put it in somebody else's mouth. First of all, if you prayed the prayer, and once you put it in somebody's mouth, you have said to everybody else at the table, it's time to eat, and they like that part. But what you've said to the person to whom you put the bread in their mouth, it's a nonverbal message. Here's another one, but this is a whopper, and you can use this. When you put bread in somebody else's mouth, you are saying to them, you are my brother or sister, as it were, and I would gladly die for you. Wait, I'm not done. I love you. I honor you. I highly esteem you. I am your friend. And most handily, in some cases, when it's necessary, it means I forgive you. Try this next time you partake of communion together. So when you put bread in somebody else's mouth, it was literally the greatest honor you could ever do for somebody in that world, except for physically dying for them. So if there's somebody here tonight that you'd like to express that to, we're going to take a break in just a minute so you can eat. And afterwards, or at church, because you were here, you know this now. If there's somebody you would like to say that to, that you are my brother or sister, I gladly die for you, I love you, I highly esteem you, I do you great honor, you are my friend, or even, I forgive you. Then find a piece of bread, tear off a small bite-sized piece, walk up to them, and shove it in their mouth. They will be blessed, and so will you. So with that, before we bring in the folks with the stew, on your table, let me tell you what's there before you're eating. First of all, I need my bread for this because I have to show you. I'll use this table here, but it's the same thing on every table, and you're going to have to share. It's a dipping meal, first of all. So you have hummus on your table, which is ground up chickpeas, a little garlic and olive oil and sesame paste, and it's in there. You know what hummus is, I think, and it's like a creamy sauce there with olive oil on top of it. You have a bowl with honey in it. You can dip bread into the honey. You have nuts on your table. You can dip the nuts into the honey. You are my kings and queens tonight. You can eat this in any manner in which you want, because I consider you superior to me. You can make the decisions, which is why you have all this stuff in different plates. Do it any way you want. You have hard-boiled eggs, which they would have had at some great feast, and you can peel those, once again holding the shell in your left hand, eating it with the right hand. You have dried fruit, including raisins, dates, dried apricots, and prunes. And they would have had other things too, but they would have eaten a lot of this because dried fruit kept for a very long time. You also have fresh fruits and vegetables. The fruits on your table that are there, they look like decorations. They're washed and ready to eat. They are not garnishes. You can pick it right off the table and eat it. Pears, apples, grapes, right there on the table. Enjoy those. Strawberries they would have had in those days too. Not looking this good, by the way. None of the food in those days looked that good, but they were grateful to have it. Your stuff is extraordinary tonight. You have pickles. They would have had pickles. Olives. There aren't supposed to be any pits in the olives, but be careful. Also with the dates. There's not supposed to be any in there either, but don't break a tooth, please. You have kosher salt on the table. Salt was also something that the saltier the food, the more welcome you were. So having salt on the table was a way of saying, you're welcome here. In fact, that's of course why we find that Paul said, let your let your speech be seasoned with salt. Because when it just mainly says you're always welcoming to Jesus, if you haven't noticed it, Jesus never pushes anybody away. He's always trying to bring people in because God isn't willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. So he's always saying, my people, welcome others in, welcome them, welcome them. This isn't a political thing. This is the gospel and bringing them to heaven with you. And also on your table, the last thing I wanted to point out was this stuff here that looks almost like oatmeal on your table. It's called haroset. You may have heard the name charaset. That's how we would anglicize it. It's called haroset. It's made up of ground up apples and dates. There's honey in here, and there may be some nuts in there if you're sensitive to it, but it's something that they would have had at a Passover Seder. Passover meal, and it's delicious. Dip your bread into it. It's one of the best desserts you will ever have in your life, and so we encourage you to enjoy that too. You also have water on your table, and you have grape juice, which stands for wine. They did have fermented wine in those days, but in order to avoid drunkenness at any feast, you were proper to water it down 4 parts water to 1 part wine, because any form of drunkenness was still a big sin. So you have the grape juice on your table. It's not wine, it's merely grape juice, and you can enjoy that too. And the bread. So with that, I'm going to ask the servants who are behind that door to come in and begin to serve you a Middle Eastern style lamb stew. How do you eat it? It's a dipping meal. Dip your bread in, grab the stew with your bread, or pick up the bowl and scoop it into your mouth with the vegetable. You can do that too and enjoy the meal. And I'll be back with you in 10 minutes. As we say in Israel, b'te'avon. Good eating to you, and enjoy your meal. I'll be back in 10 minutes. All right, if I could have your attention, please. Shh. Here's what I'd like you to do. I would like you to keep on eating until your eyes bug out. As a good host, I'm going to be looking to make sure that you leave here absolutely stuffed full of food, because I want to make sure that you have ate to the capacity. As a good host in those days, I wouldn't even eat until you were done and couldn't eat another bite. That's how I would have done things in those days. But you keep on eating, but if you would please, I need your undivided attention. So I'm going to ask you to kind of, key down on the conversations and listen up here. Now, there's a couple of things before we go a little further into this that I wanted to show you. First of all, I didn't come here to sell you anything, so don't get me wrong on this. I have a book that is on what we're doing here tonight, and it's got a lot more in the book than I can ever say here. My long version of this for students goes up to 4 hours, and I'm not going to do that to you tonight. But people had asked, can you put it down? And I did, and it's in this book called Broken Bread, Jesus, the Last Supper, and Dinner with Judas. That's this book, and it's out there. And then the book, again, everything that's in here, it was just newly revised. So if any of you have an old copy of Broken Bread, this is a brand new version of it. What I do is I put them all out there. They're donation basis only. If you don't have the money, take one. The only thing that I would ask you to do if you take anything for free is that you don't let it sit on your shelf and collect dust. You read it. And when you're done reading it, you give it to somebody else who will give it to somebody else, because the message is too important to sit on a shelf. So by all means, if you want a suggested price, I just say $10, okay? But that's not a set price, just whatever you want to do. And there's a basket back there. It's an honor system only. And if you want to write a check, write it out to me personally. And I'm J. McCarl, McCarl, if you want to do that. But here's the other one. Oh, they're making a movie out of this right now too, by the way. It should be out in about 6 months. And it's on only part of the biblical dinner, and it's called Eating with the Enemy. So if you see a movie, a Christian movie come out called Eating with the Enemy, that's this, and it's part of what we're doing tonight. So he based it on this book. The other thing that I brought is this. This is a DVD, and this is called Before the Wrath. Now, some of you, I think, have seen it, but it's based on another book and another presentation that I do, which is not a dinner, but it's a Galilean-style wedding. And it talks about, in this Galilean-style wedding, how Jesus used that metaphor visually for people to understand what his coming for his church was going to be like. And this movie maker got a hold of the book, and he went wild and turned it into a movie that sat on Amazon at #1 in documentaries, all formats, all subject matters, for over a year. And that's this. So that's out there too. You're welcome to take a look at it or take one with you. Same thing. You know, it's all donation basis only or free. There it is outside, and you're welcome to it. And I don't want to take any home with me, so please go wild over it if you would. Also on your table, I almost forgot to tell you, you have these little oil lamps sitting there. If you've never seen one of these are replicas of first century Herodian-style oil lamps, which means from the era of King Herod. That's how they designated it, Herodian. And these lamps are the exact same style of lamp, lighting with olive oil. There's no lamp oil in it. If you knocked it over, please don't. But it would go out. But these are the same lamps that would have lit the actual Last Supper table and any meal, any feast that would have happened in those days. These are the exact same type of lamps, except when you went to a feast, everybody brought their own. So even though these tables have 4 lamps, 3 lamps, on them, in those days, if you had 10 people around a table, you had 10 lamps burning. And that's what they did. So there's an authenticity to what you have on the table. Now, we're going to look at tonight, the rest of the evening, as if it was the Last Supper. Now, when I say those words, the Last Supper, you all know what comes to mind, right? Right there. Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper, painted on the dining hall chapel wall, by the way, of Santa Maria della Grazia in Milan, Italy. I was an art student for a long time, and I was getting my degree in art, and I had to study this thing. I never finished that degree. I ended up something else. But we had to look at that. That thing was nearly life-size on the wall. It's considered the greatest work of art in the Western world. It's a fabulous painting. It's in decrepit condition. It's been restored too many times so that a lot of the detail is lost. But we know what's in this thing. Leonardo da Vinci was truly the Renaissance man. He was a genius. He was an inventor. He was an anatomist. He studied the human anatomy and all of that, and he was a fabulous artist. But Leonardo da Vinci was not a theologian. This thing is horrible. He absolutely had no idea what he was painting when he painted this. This is the way the people in medieval times and Renaissance times pictured the Last Supper to look at, because they didn't know what I'm about to tell you tonight. You say, what's wrong with the painting? How did he get it wrong? It's pretty simple. Let me ask you guys a question. Some of you know the answer to this. The Passover, as a Jewish tradition, and a special ceremonial feast once a year, was expressed by God through Moses to begin at what time of day? Sunset. Look behind Jesus' head. You got a nice bright blue afternoon sky. Second, even though it's an optical effect, Jesus is right in the middle of this long elevated table. Everything in the painting points towards him, so it makes him the center of attention. I get that. But nobody in ancient times ever sat at a long or elevated table like that. Sitting on chairs or stools was only for kings and queens. They didn't eat that way in Jesus' day. And the host of the feast, who was Jesus, never sat at a central position. And look at that tablecloth, that nice big white tablecloth. Where do you get that in the first century? At the Jerusalem white tablecloth store? I mean, they wouldn't have had that. Something else, and I'm going to point this out. I have this nice little laser here, if you can see my dot over here. Look right down here. As you look down there, what do you see? The disciples' feet. Everybody is still wearing their sandals. Very bad manners, folks. And of course, if you remember, and those of you that know about Passover seders and Passover meals, there are lots of ceremonial food on the table, but there are 2 things that stand out above the rest. What were they? Somebody just say it out loud. What do you know? Lamb. All right. So there's supposed to be lamb on that table. Leonardo apparently didn't like lamb, and so he painted on that picture fish. Not only fish, but in front of Jesus, there's a plate of eels, and that's not kosher. So he didn't know what he was doing. And of course, what's the other really important item of food on the table? Bread. Unleavened bread. Would have looked like a crepe, perhaps. But Leonardo apparently didn't like unleavened bread either, and being a good Italian, he painted Italian dinner rolls all over the table, which I really like, by the way, but it would not have been there. It's an amazing painting, but it is incredibly poor theology. Folks, if you'll watch me down here, and I apologize to you guys back here, you'll see a bit of my back for the next, actually the rest of the presentation, and I do apologize, so please go with it. But the Jews never ate the way that we eat today. In fact, what would happen is that the women, first of all, did all the cooking while the men went down the street, drank coffee at Starbucks, and talked about politics, which means not a lot's changed in the last 2,000 years. But they would do the cooking. They would take a cook pot, not unlike this one, but usually made out of clay. This one happens to be bronze. They would put water in, and the main thing in the cook pot, beans or lentils, some sort of legume it were, and they'd boil it up and make sort of a pasty-like stew. They'd add vegetables. You say, what about meat? They didn't eat a lot of meat. And the reason why, unless it was a special ceremony like Passover where you ate lamb, they couldn't afford to kill their animals. Their animals like sheep, goats, oxen, chickens, whatever. Chickens gave them eggs if they had chickens, and they didn't have a lot of them in the Middle East at that time. You had sheep and goats, gave them wool and milk. They gave them their clothes, as it were. The donkeys, oxen, well, donkeys you're not going to eat anyway, but oxen too, and cows, they gave them milk and labor. They helped pull things around, carts and plows and what have you. So they didn't eat their animals. If they lived near the Sea of Galilee, or near the ocean, excuse me, I swallowed the wrong way, sorry about that. They would eat fish when they could get it, when they could afford it, unless they were fishermen, and then they could catch their own and put it, use it along with the meal. But that's how they ate. And then they would take their bread, like what you have here. We have on the table here pita bread. This is not unleavened bread that you have. But they would take their bread like this, and much like you would do in Mexico or in Latin America, when you have very thin bread like this, or in Morocco where they did the same thing, you take the bread, you pinch it a little, reach into the pot, and scoop it out with your right hand in here. This would be like a spoon, and then you'd eat it. Nobody ever double dipped. Back then, double dipping was considered bad. You don't do it. So you just dipped, and it was a dipping meal. Everybody sat around the cook pot. See how I'm seated? What's the filthiest part of the human body? What is it? Where are my feet? Out behind me. What are they pointed at? The important thing is they're pointed at no one. They're pointed that way. So we would all kneel around the cook pot, or perhaps take a different body position where somebody's feet was not pointed at somebody else. And this is how typically they would eat. That's what they did. But something changed. By the time of Jesus, the rabbis, who were good at putting burdens on the people of traditions that were not in the Bible, had imposed another tradition generally on the population. And Jesus and the disciples honored it. It was actually a pretty profound tradition, and so they did it. And that was this: once a year, every Jewish man, woman, and child in ancient Judea was to eat one meal once a year like a rich person. And that meal was to be the Passover, because the Passover celebrated, it was, by the way, you may have been to a Seder in ancient times, and Pastor Ray and I were talking about this morning. In ancient times, they didn't call the Passover a Seder, which is Hebrew for the word order, or an orderly process. They called it a celebration. It was fun. It was a happy time because it celebrated their freedom. They were in slavery and bondage in Egypt, and now they're set free. And they're free under Roman tyranny. They're saying God still set us free. So eat like a rich man, because if you were free, you were free indeed. Everybody says that. That's true, but not in this context. If you were free, you were rich. Your wealth was your freedom. You say, that sounds very American. Where do you think we got it? Judeo-Christian culture, that's us. We cherish freedom. They cherished freedom. So to celebrate your freedom, eat like a rich man, because your wealth is in your freedom. But here's the question: how do you eat like a rich man? And the answer is very simple. You eat at a rich man's table, and you sit at the table like a rich man. Tonight, all of you are sitting at a rich man's table. The shape of the table that you're at is not some random thing that we thought would look really nice. The table has a name. It's called a triclinium. It's originally the Greeks and the Romans had started to feast around tables like this, especially the wealthy Greeks and the wealthy Romans. The Judeans picked up on it. The Arabs picked up on it. If you go to Petra today, that Jordanian city where the Arabs are, in Edom, you find the tombs and the temples are full of triclinium tables carved out of solid rock. Tables like this. This is a triclinium. Three-sided, clinium, reclining table. That's the table of the preferred rich. Why is this a rich man's table? It's the U shape. It's the obvious U shape. First of all, let's go to this table here. You have the U, and everybody sits around the outside of the U of the table. Nobody ever sat in the inside. The door where you found a room with the triclinium table was always opposite the U of the table. It was never behind the table, like this door here. It would have been here in front of the table. This is a very important detail that I'm going to come back to in a minute, so pay attention to that one. Meanwhile, your servants would come in here. You would be around the table because you're rich and you're dining at a feast. The U is for the servants, like you guys did tonight, to come in and serve people from the inside of the U. If you had servants serving you from the inside of a rich man's table, you were clearly rich because you had enough to either hire servants or own slaves. That made you rich. If you had a triclinium table, you were wealthy. Do you get it? So once a year, the rabbis said, have a feast, make it the Passover, around a triclinium table, which means they had to come up with some design. They could put blankets on the ground, or they could build a table if they had the resources to do it, and then eat that way. This is the most likely shape of the Last Supper right here. It looked like this, not like that. Not like any medieval painting that you've ever seen, not like any Renaissance painting that you've ever seen. They didn't know what I just told you. So they painted it like that. It was like this. Now, I see the most likely shape. The reason I say most likely is nobody was there with an iPhone to take a picture of the table that night. But we do know that there was only one rich man style of table. I will simply say this. Twice I've been to the city of Miletus, that's Acts chapter 20, where Paul met with the Ephesian elders in Miletus. In Miletus, in the ruins of a huge, what they call a gymnasium, which is not like our gymnasiums, they had party alcoves built in that have stone triclinium tables this size, looking this shape, all over the place. It's one of the best places in the entire Greco-Roman world. You can see these things that are functional. So they're still there to this day, and they're 2,000 plus years old. Now, this is the Last Supper. But here's the question. How do you eat at such a table? It's a rich man's table, but you've got to eat like a rich man. So let me take a look here. First of all, you folks on the corners here, it would not have been an elevated table. It would have been a table like this, and the elevation of the table, according to the ones that I saw in Miletus, this is the right height. This is how tall they were. They were very short. They would not have sat around tables like this. You guys are blessed because you're comfortable. These guys have to sit on the floor for the next 45 minutes until I finish. That's a long time, so get ready. But how do you eat at such a table? Well, let me look for a second. Yeah, okay, no. Yeah, almost. No, almost. Yes. Right there. Try three-sided clinium reclining table. Here's how you ate at the table. Ta-da. Now, the table is not in front of me, at least not for the Jews. If you were very rich, you might have 3 or 4 people around a triclinium table that are on couches. That's for the Romans and the Greeks. The Jews, if you have a whole family around it, you are perpendicular to the table. In other words, the table isn't in front of you, it's at your shoulder. There would be a pillow that would go all the way around the table, or some sort of a cushion. There would be mats, either made of palm fronds or perhaps some sort of cloth or what have you around the table in order to comfort you when you're laying there. Look at where the position I'm in. I'm reclining on which arm? That's right. So I can't even accidentally touch the food with my left arm. I completely immobilized it. I'm going to eat with my right hand. What's the dirtiest part of the human body? Where are my feet? As far away from the table as I can put them and in a position where I can't accidentally insult my neighbor who is in the same zigzag position right behind me and going all the way around the table. I can't insult him. So I'm leaning on my left arm. To eat with my right hand, I have to twist like this. The table's here. I eat, I drink right here. I can even turn my body like this sometimes just to talk across the table. But to us, if you try this right now, you're going to say, this is difficult. That's because we don't spend a lot of time on the floor anymore. They spent all their time on the floor. When they sat down, when they ate, they were on the ground, so they were used to it. This is considered the wealthy man's way of eating at the table. And if you were invited to a feast, you would be on these cushions, you would have the pillows going all the way around, you would have people in the same body position behind you going all the way around the table, and you would come in at dusk usually, and there's the lamps and all the ceremonies would happen, and then you would eat and eat and eat, and you would tell stories, you would play games, you would have a wonderful time around the table. You'd catch up on the news and perhaps even catch up on a little gossip or whatever's going on in the world. And then, of course, it gets late, the lamps burn down. What are you going to do, get up and leave? There are no street lamps out there. You're going to get mugged by a thief or some sort of a very bad person outside if you go out on the streets at night. So instead, your donkey doesn't have headlights, does it? So, no. So you're going to stay there all night. And you're going to sleep right at the table. And then you get up in the morning, the rooster crows because they would have a chicken or something, and you wake up and all the food's out there. The servant has brought out breakfast, and you keep eating and singing songs and telling stories and playing games. And if this were a wedding feast, it would go on like that for 7 full days and nights. If it were a coming-of-age feast, it could go on for 2 solid weeks. If you were a poor peasant and you were invited to my feast, you would be there for that long. You may never have another experience like this your entire life. It is so elegant. That's the Last Supper and what it looked like that night, reclining at the table. Now, I'm going to shift gears here and I'll start bringing it back together again for you. The disciples had an ongoing argument. What was it? Who was the greatest? You ever wondered what they were arguing about? I'm the greatest. No, I'm the greatest. No. It was really somewhat of a political argument, as you can well imagine. But the disciples knew a passage of Scripture. It's very obvious they did because they kept going back to it when they were arguing. The passage of Scripture was Isaiah chapter 25. Who can quote it? Yeah, probably not. Isaiah 25 only has 12 verses in it, but it's a prophetic chapter about when the Messiah comes to rule and reign in his glory on the earth and take the throne of David. The disciples, all the way up until the day of Pentecost, had presumed Jesus was going to indeed do that, and they got to sit at his right hand and his left hand in glory, and they were fighting about who got to sit there, because whoever sat next to the Messiah, they were the greatest in the kingdom. But you see, there's more to it than that. Because in Isaiah 25, it tells that when the Messiah comes to rule and reign on the earth, he will initiate his kingdom with a great feast. And the disciples also knew that whoever sat at his right hand and his left hand were the greatest, because around any triclinium table, they also knew this: there's a pecking order. Yeah. There are some really good seats at this table. There are some average seats at this table. And there are some seats that no one in their right mind would ever want to sit at. Let me show you what they knew, and this will explain their argument. You walk into the U, this wing of the table right here. This wing of the table here. This wing of the table here. This one here. 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 And here. You're the VIPs. Everybody who sat at the left wing of the table when you stepped into the U, these were the important seats right there. Everybody wanted to sit there. The disciples fought over who would get to sit in these seats. Now, you folks back here, and back here, here, over here, over here, in the back there, over here, and over here. You might be VIPs, and you might not be VIPs. You say, well, that's not the way we do things. That's right. It's the way they did things. But here's the deal. You guys right here, and here, and here, 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 and here, scum of the earth. Nobody wanted to sit here, and they would fight over it. And the disciples knew it. In fact, if you boiled down the disciples' argument to one phrase, they were fighting over dinner reservations. And that really is the truth. One time, Jesus even called them to account on it. Over in Luke chapter 14, he told the disciples, whenever you're invited to a wedding feasts took place typically around triclinium tables, and they had this order, this pecking order. He said, whenever you're invited to a wedding feast, he told his disciples, do not sit down at the best seats, lest the host come to you with someone more important and say to you, friend, what are you doing there? Give place to this man. And with shame, which you don't want in that society, you get up from your place at the table and you take your seat at the lowest seats. Instead, Jesus said, sit down at the lowest seats. Way to go, you scum of the earth people. Yes. Sit down at the lowest seats so that he who invited you could say to you, friend, what are you doing there? Move up higher. And with great honor in the presence of all, and no doubt walking slowly so everybody can see where you're going, you take your place at a higher seat. Therefore, Jesus concluded for them, whoever exalts himself, which is what they were arguing about, will be humbled. But whoever humbles himself will be exalted. It was all about what happened at one of these tables. Now we're going to put it all together for you. I still have a ways to go, so hang on. Knowing what you know, this is the shape of the Last Supper table, the height of the Last Supper table, the reclining position, the pecking order around the table. This was all in play on the Last Supper night. That would be, by the way, a couple of thousand years ago tonight. I love it. You picked the right day to do it. We can determine where 4 of the men sat at the Last Supper. Only 4, but that's enough for tonight. And there is a huge message with each one. I want you to note this. This position, 1, 2, number 2, right there. Over here, 1, 2, number 2, 1, 2, right here. 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 And 1, 2, right there. That's where the host reclined. You're Jesus. You say, no, Jesus was here. That's Da Vinci. He was wrong. The host of the feast always reclined second from the end on the left wing of the table. Jesus would have been seated right here. That's you if you were in that position. That's where Jesus was. You got it? The second person whose location we know was right here. Number 1 position, left wing of the table. Here, 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 right here, here, and here. This person had an interesting title. First of all, that guy wouldn't be sitting there unless Jesus sat him there. You have to sit there because you can't randomly walk up and say, I want this spot. The host has to do it. This is the bodyguard. Say, bodyguard? They didn't have a bodyguard at the Last Supper. It's a traditional role of this place. And the reason the bodyguard is here is because the host is here, and the reason the host is here is that the bodyguard could easily protect him. You see, here's how it worked. Let me go ahead and get back down on my reclining position here. Sorry about my back, you guys. So, I am the bodyguard. I have the best view of the door. Remember, I'm not reclining like this. I'm reclining with my feet out. I can't see the rest of the table. The table ends here. It goes like that behind me. Can you picture it? And I can't see the rest of the guys, but I can see the door. The door is opposite the U, and I can look straight at it. Nobody's in front of me. I'm totally unobstructed. The door is there. A host is a very important person. If a host, being a VIP himself, because he's a VIP, he's going to have a lot of enemies. If one of his enemies decides he wants to kill the host, which is very, very easy to want to do back in those days because revenge was a way that they really recovered their honor, then somebody comes through that door and they want to kill the host, then all I have to do as the bodyguard is lose my balance. And I fall right back on top of the host and I become a human shield to the host. Therefore, the host is going to pick me to be there because I'm going to have to be basically his best friend. He's got to trust me. But here's the problem. If somebody comes through that door to harm the host, and the feast lasts for days, so they're going to know where the host is. They want to kill him, they're going to come through the door. But you see, if he comes through the door, he's got a spear, or he might have a sword. And I've got to be able to protect the host. If I fall back on him, I become a human pincushion, and then need to finish off the host. Which means that the bodyguard traditionally always brought with him a sword. Now, you say, they didn't have swords at the Last Supper. Have you read Luke 22 lately? It ends with one of the disciples saying, "Look, Master, here are 2 swords." And there were probably more, but they produced 2 just before they went out to the garden. We know that Peter had a sword. He hacked off the high priest servant's ear. And we know that this man would have had a sword, and it wasn't Peter, because the bodyguard always traditionally had a sword, and besides, guys like swords. So who is this man who is the bodyguard, who is like a best friend of Jesus with a sword? He tells us. I'm reclining at the table. Jesus is behind me. I want to talk to him. How do I do it? So Jesus, no, I'm not going to roll around on the ground like an idiot. Besides, I'll bump the table. All I need to do to talk to him is lean back. And when I do, my head falls right in the middle of his chest. I tilt my head up, he tilts his head down, we have a conversation. This is the disciple who leaned on Jesus' chest, and he tells us twice in his gospel, the Gospel of John. That was John. Now you say, that's really weird. It is, but please understand something. In the Middle East, personal space is very close. If you ever get a chance to go there and you go to Israel, you talk to an Arab especially. The Jews there, they're more Europeanized, but the Arabs are definitely indigenous to the area. And I have a number of Arab friends there, and when they talk to me, I have to get used to the fact that, well, if you talk to me afterwards, we talk to each other, you're going to be about that far away, sort of a bent arm's distance. You're here, I'm here, we talk. We have a great time. Yeah, my friends come up and talk to me, and they're about here. And I back up, and they move up. And I back up, and they keep moving up on me like they have to smell me in order to talk with me. But you see, personal space is very close. I got stranded one time on a layover at London Heathrow Airport on my way to Israel, and it was during the Hajj, when all the Muslims are heading to Mecca on their pilgrimage. So you've got Muslims everywhere in the airport dressed in traditional garments all the way down to their ankles, and you'll see men walking around holding hands. Not because they're gay, because they're friends. Personal space is close. So for a man to lay his head on another man's chest and talk to him about that far away, completely normal. This is John, the bodyguard, the disciple who leaned on Jesus' chest. Now, if John leaned on Jesus' chest, on whose chest did Jesus lean? This person, number 3 position here, number 3 here, number 3 right here, number 3, 1, 2, 3 here, 1, 2, 3 here, 1, 2, 3 over here, 1, 2, 3 right here, and 1, 2, 3 right there. You are the guest of honor. Now, I've been treating John as if he's a guest of honor because he's convenient. He's here. But normally, the guest of honor would be over here, number 3 position. You are the guest of honor. Jesus personally selected you to sit there, otherwise you would not be sitting there. Only the host has the right to declare the guest of honor. And please don't take it personally, but you are also Judas Iscariot. Guest of honor, Judas Iscariot. Guest of honor, Judas Iscariot. How does that work? Let me show you what we know. John chapter 13, especially, the other Gospels carry this too. Jesus, in the middle of the Passover celebration, the guys appear to be anticipating him taking over as king, anticipating ruling and reigning with him, even though he kept telling them, I'm going away, I'm going away, I'm going away, I'll be back someday. But they were writing that off. It must be speaking spiritually or something, because he can't be doing that. He's going to take over. And then Jesus makes this announcement in the middle of this very happy celebration they're having. He says, oh, by the way, one of you here at this table tonight is going to betray me. Of course, the people at the table, all the men, they erupt in outrage. They're shouting, who is it? Who is it? Tell us who it is, Lord. Like they're going to beat him up or something. Others of them, maybe they have some insecurities or something. I don't know. They're saying, is it me? Is it me? Lord, tell us who it is. Finally, Peter, who was over here somewhere, manages to catch John's eye over here, because John doesn't have a good view of the table. He manages to make a nod at John. That's what it means that he made a motion to him. He's going, John, ask him who it is. John then leans back on Jesus' chest and says, Master, who is it? Jesus replies loudly enough, by reading the circumstances, read the context. He replies loudly enough, apparently, for everybody to hear, it's the one who dips in the sop with me. This is a dipping meal, isn't it? There's all kinds of things to dip your bread into, and even at the Last Supper, salt water, haroset, and other things perhaps on the table. Jesus would have straightened himself out to a seated position at the table instead of reclining. He would have picked up a piece of bread, tore off a small bite-sized piece, dipped it into whatever was in front of him, reached around to his left, and put it into the mouth of Judas Iscariot. And the disciples knew that Judas couldn't possibly be the betrayer. You never put bread into the mouth of your enemy. You might punch him in the nose, you might throw him out the window, but you certainly don't put bread into his mouth. And when the bread went into Judas's mouth and he swallowed it, he got up to leave and he went out and betrayed the Lord. This is truly the most reprehensible, dishonorable moment in the entire of Scripture when Jesus did this, because he did it out of love, and Judas, out of what he did, utterly rejected it. And that was the most shameful act in the Bible, right there. But the disciples didn't see it. Besides, Judas had the money bag. You don't give the money bag to some shifty-eyed, fanged, drooling thief. You give the money bag to the most trusted of all the disciples, and the disciples, because Judas had the money bag, obviously trusted him, even though Jesus already knew Judas was a thief. But the other guys weren't buying it. And Judas had the money bag. He takes the money bag, he gets up silently, and he leaves. As the bread goes into Judas's mouth, another astonishing thing happens. Satan possesses him. Not just some demon. John tells us Satan, the devil, possessed Judas. We don't know for how long, but Judas became devil-possessed when he got up to leave, which even adds more to the infamy of the moment. The disciples' response, where's he gone? Couldn't be the betrayer. You don't put bread into your betrayer's mouth. Where's he going? And of course, John tells us that some of them thought he was going out to buy more food for the feast or give money to the poor or do some other type of good deed. But not one of them suspected Judas of being the betrayer, because you don't put the betrayer as your guest of honor, and you certainly don't put bread in his mouth, which means, betrayer, I know what you're going to do. Judas, you are my brother, and I'd gladly die for you. Judas, I love you. Judas, I do this honor to you. Judas, I highly esteem you. What do you mean by that? You'll see in a minute. Judas, I'm your friend. You're not mine, but I'm your friend. And Judas, I forgive you. And when he took the bread and went up to betray Jesus, the most infamous moment in the Bible, right there. And the disciples didn't have a clue, because you just don't do that. Should they have known? I think so. But I can't blame them any more than I would blame myself. Because Jesus, 3 years before this night, in the book of Luke chapter 6, during not the Sermon on the Mount in Luke, the sermon in the flatlands in Luke. You have to look at the location. It was a different sermon in a different location. Luke tells us Jesus said to his disciples, as a pastor, I love this, the perfect 3-point sermon. This, of course, Pastor Ray, he and I both, like, wow, I wish we could be so perfectly concise as this. Jesus said to his disciples, listen carefully, you who hear me. You know what that means? It means, listen, pay attention, don't forget this. You who hear me, I say to you, you ready? Love your enemies. Oh, you've heard that before. This is where Jesus said it. Love your enemies. Well, how do you do that? Now, I think you know, if you've been around this church for a while, you thoroughly understand that in the Bible, because it was written, the New Testament was written in Greek, there are 4 different words in the Greek for love, and they're used in different places in the New Testament. One of the words for love is storge. It's family love, the way a mother loves a child, the way a brother loves a sister. It's family love. There's the word eros. We get the word erotic from it. It's physical love. There's another word for love, which we really like, phileo. Philos, like Philadelphia, brotherly love, city of brotherly love. Philos is best described by this English word, fondness. I'm very fond of you. And we love that feeling. It's a friendship love where I am fond of another person. But Jesus uses that word for God's love, which is agape. You know it. Now, when we talk about agape love, if I were to ask you to define it, you would probably say something like this: God's love. Or you might even say unconditional love, or something like that. What does that look like? You've got to understand something about the people of this day. They didn't abstract well. So agape wasn't a concept. You should be able to see it in action. What does it look like? What it looks like is doing the good for another person that God wants you to do for them. Agape is almost more of a verb than it is a noun, because it connotates an action. You do something for another person that God wants to do for them. It's exceedingly good and God approves. It's charitable. It's giving without expecting anything in return. It's giving out. Okay, great. I'm glad you told me that. So what does that have to do with anything? I've heard this sermon before. No, you haven't. Because after Jesus says, I say to you, love your enemies, 3 words, then he gives us the perfect 3-point sermon. I wish mine were that short, and so do you. Here's what he said. He said, here's how you do it. Do good to those who hate you. Do you notice he didn't say, feel good about them? We often say, well, look, I will do good to my enemy when I forgive them. And I feel in my heart I have forgiven them. I can do all the good to them. He doesn't say that. They are still your enemy. Do good to your enemy when they are your enemy. Now, our logic says, well, I can't do that. That's like rewarding them for doing bad to me. You leave that up to God. Obey God. Do what he says. Love your enemy. Do good to those who hate you. They still hate you. Then turn around and do good to them. Oh, that's hard. Yes, it is. But it's what Jesus did to you, that while we were yet God's enemies, Christ died for the ungodly. That's you. He didn't wait till you were his friends to die for you. He died for you when you were his enemy. You see? He showed us. Oh, wait a minute. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Now, a curse is not using profanity. A curse in those days was calling down some sort of a disaster on you. It was very superstitious, by the way. It's up to God to curse, and he can only do it in his perfect justice. He doesn't do it at our behest. But I can tell you what an example of a curse is, and then I'll move on from it because it's very painful to hear. A curse would be somebody saying to you very seriously and invoking God's name on it, here's the worst curse I know. May you outlive your children. Yeah, you get it. Oh, man, that's a horrible curse. That's the worst thing I could ever think of. That's right. They're cursing you with stuff like that, and Jesus says, shalom them. Bless them. Ask God to prosper them. Bless them. And then the last one, pray for those who are harming you. In other words, they painted you into a corner. They've chained you to a wall, maybe legally or some other way, and you can't touch them, but they can touch you, they can hit you, they can hurt you, they can ruin your reputation. He said, pray for them. As we find in the Old Testament a couple of times, Jesus or God spoke through a prophet and said, don't worry about your enemy. I know where he lives. In fact, I know what he's saying in his bedroom at night. I can get to them. You can't. Just pray. I'll take care of them for you. Wow. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who are harming you. He told his disciples this, and then he put bread in Judas's mouth, and they didn't get it. But they could have. As I say, should they? I don't know if I would that night, but they certainly didn't, and they had no clue. But Jesus sat his enemy right next to him, and at one point he even announces, he's going to betray me. Judas, you're going to do it. And then to mark Judas as the betrayer, he tore off that bite-sized piece of bread, he dipped it, and he put it into Judas's mouth. Judas, you're my brother, and I would gladly die for you. In fact, tomorrow I will. Judas, I love you. Judas, I do you this honor. Oh, you don't deserve it, but I do it anyway. Judas, I highly esteem you. What does that mean? I'll get to that in a minute. I told you I would. Judas, you're not my friend, but I am your friend. Judas, I forgive you. And he gave Judas every last chance to repent, and it wasn't going to be. But there always is that moment where Jesus gives the last chance, and that was it. And Judas got up to leave the room, and nobody had a clue except Jesus and Judas. Before I move on to our last person, and then I have one more thing to say after that, my question right now, which is rather interesting to ask, how do you honor your enemies? I didn't say love. That's a given. How do you honor your enemies? Tough question, isn't it? Jesus did, and right here, he showed us how to do it. What will you do? The last person whose location we know is right here, and right here, right here, over here, right here, here, and here. Peter. Now, please understand something. This is not just the scum of the earth wing of the table. That's the scum of the earth seat at the scum of the earth wing of the table. Nobody wanted to sit there. And you know Peter. Peter liked to be first, and he'd be the first one to tell you he should be first. But he's not only last, he's dead last. What's he doing there? I can tell you one thing, he certainly doesn't want to be there. Well, then how did he end up there? Well, there's a few theories on it. They're very quick. One of them is maybe, Peter and John were assigned by Jesus to set this meal up. Maybe Peter's still outside. This is only an idea. We don't know this to be a fact, but it could be. He was outside, and everybody comes in. Of course, Jesus says, John, you're here. Judas, you're here. Everybody else takes as close a seat to this end as they can. That seat's going to be open. Peter comes back in the room. Oh, come on, guys. I can't sit there. Somebody move over here. No, Peter, sit down. But wait a minute. Look, guys, I'm Peter. Remember, I'm the rock. I walked on water. Yeah, Peter, and you sank too. Sit down. So Peter goes over to this terrible place, and he reclines at the table, but he's standing up on the inside. Maybe Peter sat here because he let everybody come into the room, and he waited because he knows nobody's going to sit there because it's the worst seat in the house. And so he's waiting because he wants the master and everybody to see how humble he is. And I'm so humble, I'm going to take that seat. And when I take that seat, the master is going to look upon me, and he's going to say, "Oh, Peter, you're so humble. Move up higher. Judas, take a hike. Come on, Peter, be my guest of honor." And he sits there and waits for Jesus to move him. And he waits. And he waits. And he waits. And why isn't he moving me? Can't he see how humble I am? And he languishes in this spot, and Jesus never acknowledges the fact that he's here. Never moves him. And now he's standing up on the inside again. There's a third possibility. I'm throwing this in there because I'm going to circle back to it in a few minutes before we start wrapping things up. And that's that I think Jesus sat him here. Now, that is my theory. If you don't like it, take it out with the trash. It's okay. But I think Jesus told Peter to sit there. They all came into the room. John, you're here. Judas, you're here. By the way, Peter, you're over here. What? Why am I going to sit there? Peter, sit here. But Master, Peter, sit there. But sit. And he goes over to that terrible seat and he reclines, but he's standing up on the inside. And why does the master hate me now? Why did he put me there? Doesn't he realize I should be up higher? And he's angry and he's languishing there. How do we know he was angry? How do we know he was there? John chapter 13, you know the story. Jesus, at one point in the evening, does something to show his disciples and us the full extent of his love. This is not a good example of it. This is not a fine illustration. This is it. The full extent of his love. What does that look like? Well, here's the deal. You see these objects right here? What are they used for? What are they used for? If there are no foot washing servants or slaves at any great feast, and that night was considered a great feast, these objects for washing someone's feet were conveniently placed right there. This is tradition. This is what they did. It was their custom. So that this person, by default, became the foot washer of everybody else. And at some point, pretty good distance into the meal, everyone's feet are still unwashed. I'm no foot washer. I'll sit here, but I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do because I should be sitting up higher. You want your feet washed, you do it yourself, but it ain't me. There's Peter. Nobody's feet are washed. Jesus gets up from the table, it tells us in John 13. He would have walked over here. This detail is not there, but you can put the pieces together. This is what had to have happened. He comes over here. He strips himself down to his loincloth, which means that, surprisingly, Jesus has just gone bare-chested. And then he takes a large linen towel. He takes the towel and he wraps it around his waist. A linen towel was quite a commodity in those days. And now the towel becomes his outer garment. And then he takes the pitcher, the basin, with the towel wrapped around his waist. Everyone's feet are not under the table. They're out by the wall, right where he can get to them. You see the picture? It's, you see pictures like this where somebody's washing Jesus' feet under a table. His feet are out behind him. Jesus comes over here, and he starts with John, and he washes John's feet. We're going back in time a few minutes. Jesus hasn't announced Judas yet. Judas is still there. Jesus washed Judas's feet. Yeah, he did good to those who hate him. And then he went around the table until the Bible said he finally came to Peter. And Peter has a very strong reaction. As Jesus kneels behind Peter and is about to wash his feet, Peter says, "Are you going to wash my feet too?" Jesus said to Peter, now these words will not exactly rot your socks off, but they are extremely important words, and I'm going to come back to it too in just a minute. Jesus said to Peter, Peter, you don't realize what I'm doing right now, but later you'll understand. And that doesn't exactly get you excited. It will. Trust me, it will. Well, then Peter has his very famous reaction. No, Lord, you'll never wash my feet. Because he's so humble. No, I don't think so. Because of the circumstances that are going on, I think those are words of horror, not humility. 6 months before this night, way up in the northern finger of Israel at a place called Caesarea Philippi, Jesus has a conversation with his disciples in which he asks them the most important question that was ever asked by Jesus. Who do you say that I am? Peter, filled with the Holy Spirit, answers from Jesus' Father, to his surprise too. You're the Messiah. You're the Son of the living God. And Jesus got excited. He rejoiced. Oh, blessed are you, Peter, son of Jonah, because flesh and blood didn't tell you this. My Father told you that. Way to go, Peter. You heard from my Father. And Peter, of all the disciples at the table, even though he's still pretty thick-skulled, he knows best who that man is, probably better than anyone else, because God told him he is the Messiah. He is God wrapped in human skin. He is the Son of the living God, and the Son of the living God is doing his job, which is the worst job in the world, washing people's feet, and he should have done it. And now the greatest in the kingdom, and what Peter comes to find out later, the greatest in the universe, is washing everybody's feet and wants to wash Peter's feet? No, Lord, you'll never wash my feet. You can hear the horror in it, as Jesus knows who's about to do it. But then Jesus said, but Peter, if I don't wash your feet, you can't have any part with me. Well, Peter loved Jesus. He said, then give me a bath. Wash me head to toe, my head, my hands, all of me. And the Lord had to calm him down. No, Peter, I just need to wash your feet. You're already clean, just your feet. And then Peter let him do it. And as Jesus knelt down behind Peter, who was reclining at the table, his feet sticking out behind him, when Jesus knelt down and washed Peter's feet, right there, this moment, this act, here, this was the full extent of his love. How so? This is when Jesus, Messiah, Lord God, creator of the universe, Son of the living God, became the foot washer of a foot washer. Do you get it? Nobody in the world was lower than a foot washer, and Jesus went below the foot washer and washed his feet, lifting him up higher than himself. That's the full extent of his love, right there. Well, Jesus put his robe back on, and he resumed his place at the table, it said. So he's dressed, and he goes back to his spot. And he begins to speak to his disciples. And he said, do you know what it is that I've done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so. That's what I am. Now that I, your teacher and your Lord, have washed your feet, so now you wash each other's feet. And then he said these 7 words, at least in English, that are said no place else by Jesus in the Bible. He may have said them another time, but it was never recorded. And I think that's significant. He said, I have set an example for you that you should do as I have just done for you. What's that? Wash one another's feet. And then he said this, verily, verily. Boy, when he says that, watch out. I tell you the truth is what it means. That a servant, that's you, is not greater than his master, that's me. And the messenger, that's you, is not greater than the one who sent him, that's me. And now that you know these things, you will be, utterly humiliated if you do them. No, now that you know these things, you will be, so pathetically inconvenienced if you do them. No, now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. Do what? Wash one another's feet. Now here's the question. How do you do that? What does that look like? Well, as Pastor Ray knows, you can say, let's have a foot washing service. As Pastor Ray also knows, if you decide to do one of those, they're very good and they're fun to do and they really bring forth a great message, but you can never announce it, can you? Because everybody, if you announce it, everyone shows up with the cleanest feet you've ever seen. Because you don't want anybody to know that you got dirty, stinky feet. And then we wash each other's feet and we have fulfilled what Jesus said. Nope, not even. Because washing someone's feet is becoming the lowest of the low and lifting up the morning. You can even look this Sunday, perhaps. Church is about to begin. Walk up to the center aisle. Feel, I need to go to church. And they're not dressed like they just crawled out of bed. Down next to them. And you say, can I pray for you? Let me pray for you right now. And you know what you've just done? You've gone beneath that person and you've lifted them up higher than yourself. Or how about this one? You find a person like that, maybe on the streets here or whatever, and something speaks to your heart about them and you say, can I buy you lunch? Can I make a meal for you? I'd like to sit down and I'd like to hear your story. Would you tell me your story? You know what you just did? You gave that person's life value that maybe they didn't even know they had or haven't seen in years. And you've lifted them up higher than yourself. And it could be something like that or a billion other ways. But it's all going beneath the lowest and lifting them up higher. Which is why I'm circling back to this and then I'll start wrapping this up. This is why I think Jesus told Peter to sit here. You see, this is the worst seat in the house, but Jesus used a very interesting illustration in Mark chapter 9, where once again the disciples are arguing about who's the greatest. I'm the greatest, I'm the greatest. He calls them together, and he says this, you want to be great in my Father's kingdom? You learn to be, and I'm going to say it literally how he said it, you learn to be the slave of everyone. Now, to us, and to Pastor Ray, he and I could do weeks of sermons off of that one verse. They understood it differently because to us, it's a devotional point full of abstractions that we can draw sermons from. To them, it was a very real and literal thing. You see, in every household that had slaves or even servants, you had a chief slave or a chief servant who was the household steward, like Joseph in Potiphar's house. He went in as a grunt slave and he came out ruling the house. Remember? The household servant, the highest rank, like in a military rank, like a general. And then down you would have a doctor. Luke was probably a slave. Doctors were bought and sold. That was your medical care. And then you might have teachers for your kids and washerwomen and cooks and herdsmen and farmers and all the way down the line until you finally got to the very bottom, the lowest, the least, the last, who was what form of slave? And they knew it. There was only one slave of everyone in a household. And when Jesus said that, they moved on to another subject because we're not foot washers, we're going to rule with you. And they dismissed it. But they knew exactly what Jesus was saying. It was not news to them. You want to be great in my Father's kingdom? What do they argue about? Being great in his Father's kingdom. Then learn to be the slave of everyone. Peter, you want to be great in my Father's kingdom? You sit there. Punishment? Nope. Peter wanted to sit in the best seat in the house. That is the best seat in the house. Peter, you don't realize what I'm doing right now, but later you'll understand. Do you get it now? If your life in this church or in your neighborhood or among your friends was typified by the seating order around this triclinium table, where would you sit? Here or here? Perhaps the most telling question, where do you want to sit? Here or here? Because that's the best seat in the house, according to Jesus, right there. Congratulations. The last thing I want to talk to you about tonight, we have to go back to our subject of bread. Now, John and I grew up in the same village together. As a matter of fact, we were next door neighbors. He and his family lives next door to my house and my family with their big generational homes, and so we got all these people there. John and I worked together. We've worked together for 40 years, and we've been good friends. And suddenly, we had a falling out. We had a quarrel. Quarrel was really bad. And John now has to recover his dignity, his honor, so he's got to do something bad to me in vengeance, and I've got to do something bad to him in vengeance. And that's the way life worked back in those days. But we've been friends, and we both know this is wrong, but our honor says we can't back down. But one of us comes to our senses. Let's just say it was me, not to your exclusion. And I come to you and I say, John, we have shamed each other. Would you break bread with me? What this means is this is how they reconcile. If John and I got into a bad quarrel in our modern day, I might say, John, this was stupid. We need to remain friends. Would you shake on it? We'd shake on it, let bygones be bygones. But that really doesn't do a whole lot. It's just sort of like things could still go bad. They made sure it was permanent. The reconciliation, at least over the quarrel, was permanent. And here's how they would reconcile. John, would you break bread with me? Now, I have a couple of trick questions to ask you. They're really simple. Please answer them. In my hand, how many pieces of bread do you see? Great. Perfect. Now, John and I are going to break bread. So I pray. I break the bread. How many pieces of bread do you see in my hands? One. It's merely broken. You say, that's tricky. No, it's not. You do it all the time. Some of you may this morning have this happen. You get up in the morning, you have a cup of coffee. You finish the coffee, you set the coffee cup on a counter, you walk by, you accidentally brush it with your elbow, the cup falls to the ground and shatters into 1,000 pieces. How many coffee cups are on the floor? Same thing. Got it? So we're not playing word games here. This is one piece of bread. It's merely in two parts. So the way that we reconcile is that you agree to reconcile. And then I take the bread, I pray for it, I break it, I hand you half the bread. John takes the bread and he eats it. The bread goes into his body and it becomes part of his body. Just like any food that you eat becomes part of you, becomes part of your body. I take the same piece of the same bread. I have the other half. I eat it. It goes into my body. It becomes part of me. The same bread that went into John became part of him, went into me and became part of me. The same bread that went into me became part of him, became part of me, became part of him. And now we are literally, in their eyes, this is the way they thought, physically related to each other. Because the same piece of bread that was in him was in me, part of each of us. What does that make us? What does that make us? Yeah, I knew you were going to say that. One. That's too abstract. It makes us brothers under the skin. We are now physically related to each other. And that means that I can't be mad at you without being mad at me. And so therefore, whatever the quarrel was that was between you and me, that we now never bring it up again, ever, to our shame if we do. And we are now reconciled by breaking bread and eating with each other. Now, you can ramp it up. There's a big story I could tell you here. We don't have time for it. But when you think about how they reconciled kings in the Middle East, you see kings that are at war with each other occasionally in the Old Testament sitting down and eating a meal together. There's a reason for that. They're breaking bread. Also, you have even in modern times, Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin with the Camp David Accords. They signed it in front of the White House between Egypt and Israel after 2,700 years of war and conflict. And they resolved it by signing a piece of paper and shaking hands? Nope. 6 weeks later, Sadat and Begin met in Beersheba in southern Israel over the well of Abraham, their common ancestor, and one of them pulled out a piece of bread and broke it, and they both ate, and there has been peace between Egypt and Israel ever since, even though it's been fragile. Now you have two men who were the leaders who were not just allied, they were brothers. And even though they're both dead, it means the Egyptians and the Israelis consider themselves cousins. Family. That's why it's still in place and hasn't fallen apart in the most volatile place in the world, because of this. On Resurrection Day, that night that I've already talked about, Jesus appears in the room with the guys, Shalom Aleichem, and of course they were terrified and answered nothing, and they thought he was a ghost. The next thing Jesus said to them was this: have you got anything to eat? And they fed him broiled fish. He ate it. A week later, he shows up in the same room, Shalom Aleichem. Have you got anything to eat? And he ate with them. Another week later, now they're up in Galilee. They've deserted Jesus again. They've gone fishing. That doesn't mean they're just biding their time. They quit. Led by Peter, went back to their old jobs. We're done. We're through. Jesus stands on the shore, gives them another miraculous catch of fish. They come up to the shore. Peter, of course, swam to shore because he realized what was going on. And as he's there, Jesus is there by the shore making breakfast. Somebody once said, you know how Jesus makes breakfast? Breakfast. Not today. All you need is a little oil, water, flour, and salt, and you can make one of these if you have a charcoal fire in a hot, flat rock. And he's got a stack of these going. He also has fish. I don't know where he got the fish, but it's there. The guys pull up in the boat with their miraculous catch of fish. They all come over, and Jesus sits down. You know what he does? He eats with them. So what? All of them, on the night he was betrayed, to the last man, deserted him. Some doubted him. No, you say, well, Thomas did. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, some doubted. So it wasn't just Thomas. What did Jesus do with those deserters? He ate with them. What did he do with those doubters? He ate with them. One of them denied him 3 times. What did he do with that denier? He ate with them. And when he ate with them, John chapter 21, they went back into ministry, as it were, and they never left him again, even to their dying day, mostly as martyrs. Because Jesus reconciled them back to himself on the shores of the Sea of Galilee over a meal of fish and bread. You may be thinking right now, perhaps, I'm not sure if I'm really reconciled to Jesus. I don't know who brought you here, and I don't know most of you in this room. But where are you at concerning salvation? Do you know you're going to heaven, or are you wondering, is God really mad at me? All night you've been hearing, he gave us the way, Jesus, the bread of life. Paul said over in Romans this: for if, when we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him through the death of his Son, how much more, having been reconciled, shall we be saved through his life? What life? The bread of life. Watch this carefully, because I finish with this. God, pretend my hand is the hand of God. Let's do that. My hand is the hand of God the Father in heaven. This is him. He takes Jesus, that bread from heaven, that miraculous bread, that if you eat this bread, him, you live forever. And he hands Jesus down, the bread of life, to sinful man. He says, will you take my son? Will you, as it were, eat him? Will you take him into yourself? And if you do, you and I will be reconciled. A couple thousand years ago tonight, on the night he was betrayed, Jesus took bread and he broke it. And he said, this bread means my body, which is for you. Eat it and never forget what you see here tonight. And God hands the broken bread of Jesus down to sinful man. And he says, will you take my son? Will you eat him, as it were? Take him into yourself. And if you do, you and I will be reconciled. You and I will be one In fact, I will be your father, and you will be my son. Along with Jesus, who is my firstborn son. He's your big brother. But we will be family. And the quarrel that I have against you for your sin, I will personally forget for all eternity. I hope you never look at communion the same way again. There's a lot going on in there, and this was something the disciples saw right now. But that night they didn't get it. They had their mind on other things. Do you see it tonight? So, if you are at odds with God, God right now is offering you Jesus, who he calls the bread of life, who Jesus called himself that. Take him, and all will be forgiven. God guarantees that. Take Jesus. And lastly, if you're at odds with somebody perhaps in this room, you're sitting across the room, but you're saying, I wish they weren't here. Or maybe in church, when you come on Sunday, you're reluctant because somebody else is there that you don't like. A suggestion: make them a meal. Buy them lunch. Take out a piece of bread, any bread, Wonder Bread, I don't care. And tear off a small bite-sized piece and say, would you eat this with me? You say, well, they wouldn't understand what that meant. They weren't here. It doesn't matter. You know. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. Besides, in the words of an ancient rabbi, it takes two to reconcile, but it only takes one, only one, to forgive. Would you all stand, please? You've endured a lot tonight. Thank you for staying for a little bit of an extra inning there. If I could, I'd like to leave you with a blessing. And it goes like this. Yiva rechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Ya'er Adonai panav alecha v'yechunecha. Yaseh Adonai panav alecha v'yasim lecha shalom. May the Lord bless you and keep you and make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May he lift up his countenance upon you and give you shalom. Shalom Alechem, everyone. Yeah, close enough. God bless you, and thank you for coming to the biblical dinner.